Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We will give folks a few more minutes to join or a few more seconds to join here before we kick off this afternoon. So hang tight. All right, I'll go ahead and kick us off. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our June monthly policy update. We will allow folks to continue to join over the next few minutes while I give my introduction. If you're new here, welcome. IS hosts this monthly webinar as an exclusive benefit to our members. And so we are glad you're here to join us as we share the latest policy developments happening in Capitol Hill, regulatory developments, and just make sure you have a space to ask questions of our policy team and know what's happening here in Washington, D.C. In terms of today's discussion, we will focus on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which takes effect on July 1st. As you all might remember, back in the fall of last year, the Department of Education released a proposed rule around the PSLF, which would make changes to eligibility around the benefit. Since then, IS had encouraged our members and our networks to submit comments, as did many other organizations. I know that many of you submitted comments. And so the final rule is set to take effect in just a couple of days here. And so we want to make sure you know what to expect, know what the sector can expect as a result of this rule, and just provide as much information as we can about what'll happen and what you can do in the meantime. And we are joined by a special guest, Andrew Shore, who is a partner at JST Strategies, will join us for this PSLF discussion. I'll turn to Andrew here in a few moments to start that discussion. Once we wrap up our PSLF discussion, we will get into some policy updates. I know that the OMB's proposed rulemaking around grant making is a hot topic. And so we have just recently released a blog and provided some guidance around comments from independent sector, as well as driving our networks to submit your own comments. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, as well as some happenings on Capitol Hill from my colleague Travis Swanson and our most recent edition of the monthly DC download. So that's our agenda for today. And as always, as a part of our webinar feature, you all are muted this afternoon, but we always like for these webinars to feel as interactive as possible. So feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along, and I will pause periodically to answer them. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Andrew, and also will not turn it over to Andrew, but I will begin by asking Andrew, just diving right into our discussion on PSLF this afternoon. Andrew, before we dive in, if you would just introduce yourself, talk about some of the work that you do, and we'll dive in with our first question after.
Sure. Before I introduce myself, quickly, I've run for several years the PSLF Coalition. It's an organization of over 100, probably 120 groups from all walks of life, including independent sector. And independent sector has been a fantastic participant in the coalition. Travis in particular has done a great job, just so you all know. He's done a lot of Hill advocacy with us, and he has really opened doors for us. He's been an active participant. So we're really grateful for the work that you all have done with us on PSLF. And as evidence of that, there were so many radical changes to education programs in the OB3, the reconciliation bill. And yes, there were things on the periphery that created challenges for PSLF, but keep in mind, PSLF itself remained unchanged, right? They didn't change the fundamentals of the program. And I think that goes to the hard work that the coalition, including independent sector, did over the last several years to generate strong bipartisan support, to maintain the support that was there and create new support. Because there are definitely people who don't like the program. Chairwoman Fox not like the program, but we overcame that. Um, Quickly, my background, long time ago, I worked on the Hill, worked for mostly House members, Republicans. I ran one of the leadership offices in the House Republican Conference back in the early 2000s when George Bush was president. And then I was, for a hot minute, I was a partner at a big law firm. I went to law school at night. And then I started a law and lobbying firm with two of my partners. One retired several years ago. We've had this firm for many years, and it's had a very diverse practice. You name the issue, we've done it. But we believe in substance. We get very deep into our topics. Personally, I'm a very big civil libertarian, big rule of law guy. I also practice law. About 15, 20% of the work I do is on the legal side. But like I said, we've been doing this work for a very long time. I think it's very important. And the PSLF program is pretty critical to assisting communities with critical needs.
And thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. And I'm going to flag for our tech team. I had a comment here that said they can't see you, Andrew. And so I just want
Oh,
to make sure on our side, the tech team, it's not an issue of us because I can see you just fine. Um, there you go. You're on the screen now. Perfect. So let's move along, Andrew, and just dive right in. We know that the rule is taking effect on July 1st, and specifically as it relates to nonprofit leaders, what can we expect? What are some of the most significant changes that we can expect on July 1st?
sure. So, right. So the rule is part and parcel with the statutory changes. And I think the things that we're tracking. So one, you're going to now have two repayment plans as opposed to the myriad of repayment plans you had before. You'll have the repayment assistance plan, or the RAP, which will be, they don't call it income based, but it will be, in my opinion, income based, based on 1%, 1 to 10% of your earnings, with possible forgiveness after 30 years. That plan will be, if you are enrolled in that plan for repaying your student loans, you can participate in PSLF. The tiered standard plan, you cannot participate in PSLF. That is the other repayment option. And if you do not choose a plan, you will be defaulted into the tiered standard plan. And this is really important. We're going to talk about this more later. New borrowing limits, I'm sure you're all aware of. The biggest concern that I think a lot of folks have is there are going to be some really strict rules for employer participation. And these are the basis for several lawsuits. They have structured rules that give the Secretary of Education what a lot of folks, including myself, call extrajudicial authority now to disqualify employers for engaging in what might be termed illegal activities or furthering illegal activities. And those can be broadly defined. And it's very concerning. And employers, and we're gonna get into that in a little bit of detail. But this is where I think things get troubling. That employers are going to be wading into a bit of a thicket with this. And these again are the basis for some of the lawsuits that have been filed recently.
And thank you for that overview. And I know we'll get into sort of eligibility and the different types of repayment plans and all of that. Speaking of lawsuits, I know that there have been some legal cases filed. Could you give us a status on where those are?
Sure. There were three cases filed. I think two of note. Two of the cases were filed in Massachusetts, and they're before the same judge. One was brought, the lead is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Um, the other was brought by several not-for-profits, teachers, unions, associations, also in Massachusetts for the same judge. And then the final case was brought before the D.C. Circuit federal court. Um, None of those cases have been tried yet, and no injunctions have been filed, unfortunately. So, barring some sort of miracle before July 1st, um, with an injunction being laid by one of the judges, the rules will go into effect. I just checked the posture of each of the cases yesterday. Um, I, you know, I haven't seen anything that would indicate that an injunction would be, you know, that there would be an injunction by any of the judges. The one in the DC Circuit is being litigated by a lawyer that we speak to pretty regularly, a guy named Dan Zeibel. He's really, really sharp. Um, so I always have high hopes when he's trying a case, but I think we're going to have to wait and see on each of these.
Thank you for that. And I know it's something you'll continue to track. We talked about earlier employer eligibility as one of the more frightening things within this rule. Are there specific types of nonprofit, specific categories of organizations that should be paying particular attention as the rule prepares to take effect? Any sort of thing that you would say there?
Yeah. So I'll back up. Let me back up a little bit first, give you a little precursor on that issue. So there are two there are two things that I'd pay attention to before looking at the specific employer. So what is the power that's been given to the secretary? Um, the power that's been given to the secretary is that he or she now has this extrajudicial authority that to determine by a preponderance of the evidence, that's a judicial term, right? That's a judge term. Um, that an employer may have been found to have, um, uh, you know, engaged in a illegal activity or a substantial illegal purpose. And this is where it gets troubling. The secretary weighs evidence of, I'm just going to read it, weighs evidence of illegal activity and determines that if that illegal activity is so severe or pervasive in the organization that more than an insubstantial amount of its activity has an illegal purpose. I mean, this is troubling. This gives the secretary a lot of power, and it's not appealable, right? You can't appeal it to a court. Your only recourse is you can wait 10 years, and then you can ask for reconsideration of the termination of your PSLF eligibility. I think it's less about the categories of employers. And for this administration, in my opinion, having read the regulation, I think it's more about the activities. I think the obvious one is any work with issues related to unauthorized immigrants would be sort of a top line issue. Now, we believe this won't affect lawyers because there are situations where there are public defenders whose work has been outsourced, like in some of the New York boroughs. And lawyers, public defenders get their cases assigned by judges. You can't pick and choose. So if you're representing unauthorized immigrants, and the whole now public defender organization is disqualified, that would be somewhat ridiculous. So we don't think, or at least we're being assured that attorneys groups won't be disqualified. However, here's the problem. What if you're a not-for-profit that's working on policies and let's just for lack of a better term, pushing the envelope in a direction that is contradictory to the policies of the current administration? right? And I say that without judgment. I just state that as a matter of fact, right? As a political operative and professional for 30 years, I just state that as a matter of fact. Well, would they consider that an illegal activity? I don't know. Are you undermining the law by trying to rewrite the law? I mean, we see this in other areas. I won't get deep into the OMB rule, but you're talking about it later. And it uses language like the national interest and administration priorities to terminate grants. And this is all consistent with with larger agenda items. So, um, I think it's looking, and if you look at the language even in the press release, they talk about um, you know, illegal activities considered by the secretary include terrorism, trafficking, aiding and abetting, illegal discrimination, right? They talk about buckets of activities and not necessarily specific employer types. But again, I'm not 100% convinced it's, loading people into a truck and driving them across a border, which I think is what one might envision as a layperson. I'm concerned it could be broader than that. I think it could be policy work. I'm not saying it will be, but might be.
And that's the challenge of this type of just vague guidance. And let me ask you this, Andrew. I know um, there's still a lot to be seen in terms of the types of work that will be impacted. But in terms of what organizations can be doing now, I know that our comments and a lot of our posture around PSLF was, the way that many C3 organizations use it as a recruitment tool. And so, as difficult as recruitment can already be in the nonprofit sector, it's just another resource that is in jeopardy for us. What would you advise leaders be doing right now to support employees who might pursue PSLF? Anything that they can be doing now, knowing that this rule is right around the corner?
Sure. So independent of the employer side of the regulation, um, we do have a few challenges and we could really use some help. So back to the changes in the repayment, um, in how they've changed the loan repayment options. Um, you know, Schools hopefully will do a good job of educating students on their way out the door that look, you need to be aware that if you don't pick a plan, you're going to default into the tiered standard plan and you can't do PSLF. I always like to use what I call the Katie Shore example. My daughter, she's studying forensic science at VCU. She could go right out and join any one of an agency. She's gotten to know the woman who runs the Richmond PD, and she could go do forensic science when she graduates. And she's a great example, right? Because she's my daughter. She's a little strong-willed, even though her dad works on PSLF, she might not really listen to him. And, she gets an apartment, she gets a job, she's hanging out with friends, and she ignores that little notice she gets that says, you better pick a plan. And then she wakes up a year, 2 years later, and she loves what she's doing, and she's defaulted into the tiered standard plan. And you can't switch, right? And so now 2 years worth of work, she has no PSLF credits. So what employers can do is they can, as they're recruiting, don't wait until you hire because it might be too late. As you're engaging in recruitment, help us educate students who are about to graduate. Make sure you pick the repayment assistance plan if you want to maintain eligibility. Now, we as a coalition, as Travis knows very well, our top legislative priority is to clarify the legislation so that any repayment plan qualifies for PSLF. That's our number one advocacy goal right now. But until we can win that legislative battle, that would be a tremendous public service that you could do, is educate, you know, pending graduates on that task. And we have another, we can talk about storytellers, or we can talk
And
about,
and you're actually leading to my last question for you here in terms of, in addition to what folks can do in terms of recruitment, just talking about ongoing advocacy. We know that the CRF in Congress failed, and so essentially, that angle to scaling back the rule or nullifying the rule is out the window. But in terms of individual advocacy efforts, sector advocacy efforts, talk a little bit about what you all have and some of the things that you would encourage for our members to take part in. Would love to hear it.
Sure. So you referenced the CRA, which included this technical clarification we're talking about, which would ensure that no matter what, and this is how the program operated before, right? You graduated, you had a loan repayment plan, and you could join, and you could go work for a PSLF eligible employer, and you didn't have to worry. Your credit, as long as you made 120 on-time repayments, right? After 10 years, the balance of your loans were forgiven. It didn't matter what repayment plan you were in. And by the way, Parent Plus loans will no longer count. If you took a Parent Plus loan, it doesn't matter what you pick. Even if you're currently in a Parent Plus loan, there's no grandfathering, just as an aside. So we have this really neat and effective program called our Storyteller program. Really excited. It's something that if you're interested in helping us with, we would love it. We have folks who are, directly who are success stories, who are engaged in the community, who have gone through the PSLF program. We have a veterinarian in Alaska. Her name's Dr. Jones, and she is like an Indiana Jones. She lives a life of adventure, and she just tells tremendous stories. But what I really enjoy, and what I think staff really appreciate, is they learn the scope and scale of what she brings to Alaska. Most people understand she's responsible for all food inspection, and not just food, that the salmon industry, but all of the beef that comes from Japan, all of it. And there are only two federal veterinarians in Alaska, in the entire state. So when she paints this picture, you suddenly think to yourself, this is pretty daunting, right? Like, she's got a big job. So it's the scope and scale of what she does. We have a physician in rural Pennsylvania who doesn't just see patients, but she trains other doctors. You think about, if you ever watch The Pit, right? You think about how you have to be in some big city hospital to be training physicians, but she's training doctors. And some people might think, oh God, do you really want to be leveraging doctors because, oh, they make so much money? Her PSLF repayment was more than her mortgage. And so when she explains that to staff and she gives them the numbers, suddenly staffers' eyes get very big. They start to appreciate that not every storyteller needs to be some poor teacher, right? Or some poor opioid counselor. Like, you can bring a doctor to the table and tell their story, and it can be very, very effective. So we're particularly looking for, if I'm going to shrink the universe here a little bit for you, we're looking for members of the Senate Health Committee, in particular Kansas, because Senator Marshall is going to take over, Florida, South Carolina. So Florida, Senator Moody; South Carolina, Senator Scott; Idaho; Pennsylvania, which isn't help; Georgia; Pennsylvania brings us G.T. Thompson, who's on education and workforce, Senator McCormick. We've had some good conversations with Ohio. Those are the states that we're really targeting. Um, and we're looking for just interesting people with unique stories, and we leave it to you to go figure out who. And then, you know, I work closely with the Raven Group. Some of you may be familiar with them. We've run this coalition together for many years. So we have a whole screening process.
And that was Andrew. I was going to ask that follow-up question, and I'll get to some questions in the chat here, in the questions box in a second here. But in terms of story collection, is there a specific process that you have? Is there a portal?
Yeah,
I just want to see if the
we'll send you.
coalition
We
has
have a
it.
whole the Raven Group's handling the back end, and Van, I'll make sure you get you know, you and Travis get the mechanical side of that. Yeah.
Great, great. I'll send it out. And I had a follow-up question too. About the repayment assistance program. I know, or the repayment assistant plan, making sure that students are selecting the correct repayment plan in those recruitment efforts and nonprofits helping to spread the word. Do you know of any organizations, national organizations, who are really leading the charge on that messaging for nonprofits to be able to, you know, spread the message of selecting the right repayment plan?
So you know, we need to ask that question of our broader coalition. I know the Student Borrower Assistant Center, I think it's now just student, they shorten the name, but they do tremendous work. And they're part of the coalition.
Got
Um,
it.
and they put out a lot of useful information.
Got
Um,
it. And I'm going to repeat those states again, just so if anyone is from those states on the call, you have them. It was Kansas, Florida, South Carolina, Idaho, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Ohio
yeah.
were the states that I captured here. And so I'm going to get into a couple questions that we have here in the Q&A box. Will the changes be retroactive, or will they apply to future loans and hires only?
So for Parent Plus, applies across the board. Um, and I'm not a technical expert on this, so I'm going to tread super carefully. I know uh, everybody who's graduating applies going forward, but I would be more confident getting a better concrete answer on that because it is really complicated. So let's write that one down, and
Yep,
we'll
I wrote it down.
we'll do a QFR on that one.
I was like, we're getting some work for the
Well,
coalition here. I have another question here that's pretty specific to, I think, the coalition's work. Do you have targeted, or excuse me, do you have tailored materials for those target states?
so tailored materials. So you know, our we have one legislative objective right now. So we don't, the tailored material would be finding the storyteller. In terms of tailored material, what we have is, um, you know, we during the Biden administration, that was the end of what we call the first cohort, the first 10 years of folks who graduated PSLF. So we have those numbers by congressional district. That would be like a data point that we share. But the tailored material is the storytellers or the
Yeah,
anecdotes that we collect from associations. Um, the pitch is, look, you have a problem. And the problem is you're going to have all of these folks who are going to graduate from college. And you've got the Katie Shore problem. And you're going to wake up 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, and you're going to have tens of thousands, maybe millions of people default into the tiered standard plan, and you're going to have the switchboard shut down. You will, and you're going to be dealing with a real problem. But the issue is there's a latency effect to this problem. And Congress does not, for those of us who have worked on Capitol Hill, Republicans and Democrats, we know Congress has a challenge when it comes to dealing with issues that have a latency problem. Um, but tailored materials, that's what the storyteller's for. Look, the good news is nobody, we haven't been in any office where they haven't appreciated the problem on either side of the aisle. Nobody has rejected the merits of the issue, but we need the constituent help.
Yeah, yeah. And those states too were Senate members of the Senate Help Committee. So I want to make that clear too. Um, and I think just data around nonprofit workforce would be helpful to be coupled with those stories. I know IS has our state data profiles that name, that talks about the nonprofit workforce. Another question here, and then others feel free if you have questions to put them in the Q&A box here. Are there opportunities to make the program more accessible to nonprofit staff? How should we advocate for those changes? I know that one change you mentioned, Andrew, and I think this is what this question is getting at, is expanding the eligibility requirements to cover both types of repayment options. I think that's what this question is getting at. But are there other opportunities to make the program more accessible?
To make it more accessible. You know, like the program was founded. I mean, remember, this was a program signed into law by President Bush based on the idea that we were filling critical needs. So, what I hear when I talk to Republicans, and I hear this not just with this program, but when I work on other issues, is anytime you can frame something in terms of workforce, critical needs, you know, those types of areas, then you're going to be effective. And in some of the states that I referenced and some of those senators, it comes down to data, which I know goes back to the question about what materials are you
Yeah.
using. We've always had a challenge getting data in this program. It's hard, it's really hard. So this is going to be a little like cyclical, the argument solution here. But if you have workforce data, if you have, particularly where it comes to critical needs, um, and it's not just rural, it's underserved too, right? Like a senator represents a whole state. So, it can be Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and it can be the rural counties, and it can be opioid counselors in both, and it can be disaster relief, and it can be, I mean, we don't have to think of these things in a linear manner, right? We can think of these things as holistic, or we can think of them as chronic, or we can think of them, I mean, they're like multi-dimensional ways to think about how these problems get solved, and then, find anecdotes and then use those anecdotes to build data. But that's what I get when I talk to Republicans is, look, we recognize there are workforce challenges. Just give us data to support your hypothesis. That's what it comes down to. And then I think ultimately, yeah, the program can be expanded. I'll give you one final example. G.T. Thompson used to introduce a bill, a Republican, who's chairman of the Agriculture Committee and one of the top members of the Ed and Workforce Committee, used to introduce a bill to expand this program to farmers and ranchers. Now, I'm not going to make judgments about whether that's good or bad policy, but think about it. He didn't introduce it this Congress, but for several Congresses, he introduced a bill to expand PSLF to farmers and ranchers. Okay. So I think that should answer your question. But right now, we're facing an area of contraction and restriction in this program.
Yeah.
We're under siege in this program, right? We're fighting a lot of fires. And I think we have to, the priority right now is dealing with the extrajudicial authority that's being created for the secretary, and that's being fought on the legal front. And for the coalition, it's fixing this loan repayment issue. Or my biggest concern is that kid who is graduating high school and says, you know what? I would love to be a doctor. but I'm not even going to study biology in college because I I don't think there's going to be any path forward for me because this PSLF thing is there's just too much, there's not enough there. There's not enough opportunity. Student loans have gotten too complicated. There's not enough chicken on the bone for me to move forward. You know,
Yeah.
that's my fear. And then how do we prove that people, you know, didn't select these opportunities? We'll never be able to, that's data we'll never be able to get.
And I'm going to pause you there, Andrew. Appreciate you giving us so much to think about. I know there are some tools and resources that you'll share out with us as you all continue to get them. I think we've got some solid next steps that we as a sector can do, and it sounds like just storytelling right now is what's critically important. Andrew, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us.
you, Donna.
Really appreciate your time and your expertise. I am going to pivot here to move us along, and if folks have lingering questions, as always, put them in the questions box. I'm going to move us along to ask my colleague Tyler Hinkle to join us here. I know that the OMB's proposed rule around grant making is a hot topic these days. And so I want us to dive into that discussion a little bit. Tyler, you just released your very first independent sector blog. And so we are putting you on the spot here to talk us through what we've been what we've been pulling out of that OMB rule and what folks can do in response. So Tyler, I'll just kick it over to you to take us down sort of what you've highlighted in your blog.
Great. Thanks, Ben. And good afternoon, everybody, or good late morning, I guess, if there's any folks on the West Coast. Yeah, as Vanna mentioned, we recently released a blog on the independent sector website talking about these recent proposed changes from the Office of Management and Budget. Top level, this would be a change to the uniform guidance, which is the rules that govern federal grants and other cooperative agreements for organizations like nonprofits from the federal government. And these proposed changes would turn the uniform guidance from guidance into formal OMB regulation that would be government wide. So that's one of the kind of significant changes in that, regardless of the specific policy. But there are a lot of concerns that we have in this proposal that ultimately would make the federal grant process much more uncertain for nonprofits and would highly politicize the process. Some of the most concerning provisions would require federal agencies to administer grant programs, not only in a way that adheres to what Congress has passed via legislation, but they would have to do it in a way that aligns with administration priorities. This is something that they don't have the authority to do. But beyond that, it also creates a lot of uncertainty from administration to administration because, as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of these federal programs are, long-term initiatives to address, various issues throughout the country. And if an administration every 4 to 8 years that comes in with significantly different priorities can significantly shape what these programs are looking like. So not only are nonprofits having to try to tailor their proposals in a way that accomplishes their mission and what they're trying to do in their community, they also have to appease the political priorities of any administration in power, which is not really a sustainable practice in our opinion. Beyond that, there are vast increases to power for political appointees in this process. Um, Appointees would get the ability to review uh, awarded proposals after they've been selected through the agency selection process, but before funds have actually been dispersed, to again ensure that it advances the administration's priorities and aligns with the national interest. And I'm using quotations because a lot of these are terms that are not actually defined and leave a lot of discretion for the decision makers to decide what does and what does not further the national interest, right? Again, and having political appointees do this pretty much means that folks who are going to advance the priorities of the president and power are going to get to pick with winners and losers in this, regardless of the merits of any individual organization's application. Um, there are also a lot of concerning changes around agencies' ability to modify grant terms mid-award or to even terminate grants mid-award, again, based off of what they deem to advance the national interest at any given time. So, for example, agencies could add additional oversight or reporting requirements that were not stipulated whenever a grant was originally awarded. And they could do something as drastic as changing the funding mechanism for these grants. So maybe when an organization accepts and wins a grant, they do so under the terms that the funding is going to be provided beforehand, and they're going to have cash on hand to administer whatever services they may be doing. Under this rule change, agencies could change that to where organizations have to provide services and then they get paid on a reimbursement basis, which for smaller organizations that are not as well resourced, that can be a nail in the coffin that they are no longer able to provide those services because they don't get the cash up front. Um, and again, a lot of concerns about additional power to terminate awards, especially those that extend from one administration to the next. So if you have, a 2 or 3 year grant, potentially, if a new administration comes in and says, actually, we don't think this is important or this doesn't align with our policy priorities, they can cut off funding, and there's no path to counter that. There's also a lot of concerning provisions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, any gender-related services. So there are provisions that would, outright prohibit any funding going towards illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion, and any gender-related services. And a lot of the DEI initiatives that this current administration has said are unlawful, have ultimately found to not be unlawful and are being executed in accordance with federal law, and would really put organizations who engage in those types of activities on equal ground because they don't know what types of services they can and can't do and what is going to be deemed lawful and what is not unlawful. And it also, despite those challenges, also I think puts the public in a position where they don't know if the executive branch is going to administer federal programs in a manner that's consistent with congressional intent, because Congress ultimately has the power to formulate these programs in a way that they deem fit, and the executive administers it. Um, but it's important to note that not everything in this proposal is harmful. There are a few nuggets in there that we do think can be helpful overall. That by turning this guidance into OMB-wide regulation, it does create some more consistency from agency to agency, particularly with agency-specific compliance issues. And there's some silver lining as well to posting all of the notice for funding opportunities centrally on grants.gov. So that smaller or newer or under-resourced organizations who may not have a lot of familiarity navigating the grant process have one central place to find all these opportunities, and they might not necessarily need a vast and well-versed legal department to do so. But overall, the concerns that we have with this proposal far outweigh the small kind of technical advancements that may be made. And we think that long term this will do much more harm to the nonprofit sector than good. And some of the things that we're encouraging folks to do is submit comment to OMB in opposition of this. The comment period goes through July 13th, so we've got a little 2.5, 3 weeks for folks to do that. And we have some good resources on our website, also listed in the blog that Vanna shared, that links to the Independent Sector Action Center, where we already have 95% of a pre-drafted comment, and we're encouraging folks to look at that and customize it slightly to show how these changes would impact your organization specifically. And we've also got some other good resources from our friends at the National Council of Nonprofits who have been also a leading voice in opposition to this proposal. They've got a letter to OMB opposing this, and they also have some additional resources on reaching out to members of Congress to share your concerns or to help formulate your own organic comment opposing this.
Tyler, thank you so much for that overview. And like you said, we've linked the blog in the chat box. So if folks would take a look at that. And I do just want to lift up and really echo what you said about submitting comments and just making sure that people, especially if you're using our portal or NCN's portal or whoever else's, that you're customizing your comments so that they're unique to OMB when they're received. And there's a box, again, we include some standard language on in our comment draft for you. If you would click in that empty box and just talk a little bit about the potential impacts to your organization, the work that you do, and really customize them. I think the last time I looked, maybe last week, there were over 13,000 comments submitted already. And so we are just encouraging folks to submit as many comments as possible, as many organizations as possible, and also to customize them to your own organizational concerns. And so thanks, Tyler. Any questions from anyone about the OMB proposed rule? And again, that deadline for commenting is July 13th. So you have a little bit of time here. I'll pause to see if we have any questions here on the proposed rule. Um, Question here about foundation members. Are we rallying them to offer comment as well?
I'm not entirely sure actually, but I mean, I think generally the more the merrier with these types of initiatives, but I'm not sure to what extent we're reaching out to the business community.
And then there's a question here about sending this to organizations that are not IS members. Absolutely. Again, the goal with comments is just volume. And so we encourage as many organizations as possible to submit comments to OMB before July 13th. So absolutely, please share the blog. It has not only our comment portal, but many other resources there for organizations. And there's just another comment here about the business community, getting them engaged, those that sit on national boards. It's a good comment here. Other questions, comments, and Travis, I wasn't sure if you came on board to answer the question about foundation members, but feel free if you had a response to that as well. Yes, there's a question about can you use our portal to add your own comments? That's the goal of IS's portal, our action center. It is a draft comment letter. It's draft language for you all. I won't say it's a draft comment letter. It's draft language, just starter language for you all to use to submit your own comment. There's a blank box within that action for you all to submit your own personal stories, tell OMB how this new rule would impact your organization. Please fill in that box and customize your comment before sending it in. So that's the point of our portal, is to make it easy for you all to submit your comment to OMB. That comment that you submit through us, it won't go to IS, it goes directly to OMB. So that's the goal of it there. And feel free to share that with non-IS members as well. Again, the goal is to get as many comments as possible over to OMB. There's a question here. I'm not sure I understand it, about advocacy groups, trade association. The meeting and conference attendance items are lower on the priority list, but are there to dismantle advocacy groups and trade association advocacy. What is your advice there? And I'm assuming are there meeting and conference attendance items within the rule itself? Is that your question? This is anonymous, so I can't tell who it's from. If you would clarify that question. Oh, in the proposed rule, the meeting and conference attendance items are lower on the priority list, I'm assuming within the proposed rules, but they're there to dismantle advocacy groups and trade association advocacy. Any advice there? And then a follow-up on the feds would have to approve attendance.
Yeah, and I'm not super versed on that specific part of it. Again, this is a 400 plus page document, so there is no shortage of issues within this proposal. And honestly, I think the consensus that I've gotten from the groups that we're working with is that it seems like folks are figuring out what all is in this a little bit more day by day. So I think my advice would be if you have found something that is particularly impactful to you
Yeah.
that you see as a major red flag, include that in your comments to OMB, and encourage the folks in your network to echo the same concerns. Because again, the more the merrier with this. So the more folks who are expressing the same concerns, that just brings those issues more to light.
And we'll look into this. This is a good flag from whoever submitted this question. And the follow-up is the feds would approve use of federal funds to pay membership dues like to independent sector. We'll definitely look into this. It's a good flag. Other questions? And yes, thank you, Tyler, for pointing out how massive this rule is. I know there's been a number of organizations doing webinars breaking down different pieces of the rule, so there's a lot to know. I think I have asked all the questions that I'm seeing here. And so with that, I know we only have a few minutes left. Our DC download was released today, hot off the press. Travis, if you would come on camera here and give us a rundown of what's in this episode or this edition of the DC download and what's happening on Capitol Hill.
Sure, and I'll be super quick today. So I just want to say good afternoon, everybody. So there are a few things in the DC download. Some were PSLF or OMB related, so I'll leave those out. So for the interest of time, since we already talked about that, we'll also note I do have a hard stop at 3 o'clock. I have a Hill meeting I have to jump over to right after this, so I have a lot of incentive to be quick here. So first, on Tuesday, so just a couple of days ago, the Giving USA Foundation released its annual report on charitable giving in the United States. The headline number is $617.2 billion with a B in charitable contributions in 2025. So that's a record high in current dollars and the first time we have ever crossed the 600 billion mark. So that's incredible. By that measure, Americans gave more to charity last year than at any point in our nation's history, and that is genuinely something worth pausing on, especially in the year that it was. By any measure, it was a turbulent year for the sector, and people stepped up and made donations. That's great. So yes, let's take a moment to recognize that. The generosity of the American public does not waver. Donors showed up, and the organizations, on this call and across the country, and made the case for why giving matters, and that's not nothing. But I'd be doing you a disservice if I stopped there because when you look beneath the record number, there is kind of an important caveat to it. The 2025 data largely reflects giving that happened before the most significant tax changes from last year's budget reconciliation, the One Big Beautiful Bill or HR1, took effect. So most of those changes kicked in at the start of 2026, meaning yet we haven't yet seen the full impact of them reflected in these numbers. And we have serious concerns about what those numbers are going to look like when we do. So independent sector, alongside researchers and economists across the field, have raised alarms backed by data that the tax changes enacted last year in HR1 will reduce charitable giving going forward. So we are talking about changes that weaken the incentive to give, that affect how donors think about their contributions, and that could make next year's Giving USA report look vastly different from the one we're seeing today. So the message I want to leave you with is this. The record we are celebrating today is real. It matters, but it is also a baseline we might struggle to hold moving forward. So the work ahead, at Independent Sector, we are advocating for policies to protect and expand giving, including trying to roll back some of these harmful provisions in HR1. Though we have to be realistic, there's not really a legislative vehicle that we anticipate moving this year that is likely to happen at least this year. But nevertheless, this has never been more important. It's something that we are very focused on, and the work is starting right now. I am going to drop a link in the chat here just to the Giving USA report so you can kind of take a deeper dive in your free time if you're interested. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is that has been weighing heavily on the entire sector is the ongoing federal case against the Southern Poverty Law Center. So on June 9th, Brian Fair, SPLC's interim president and CEO, appeared before the House Judiciary Committee for a hearing that Republican leadership titled, and I want to make sure I get this right, the Southern Poverty Law Center Manufacturing Hate Part 2. So that title alone tells you something about the tone of what took place. The questioning centered around SPLC's former confidential informant program, a program that the Department of Justice has alleged was used to secretly pay operatives embedded in white supremacist groups, including the KKK, Aryan Nations, and neo-Nazi organizations, in violation of donor trust. Those are serious allegations, and they do deserve to be taken seriously, but here is what Brian Fair told lawmakers under that questioning. The program existed to gather intelligence on violent extremist groups. So that intelligence was shared with local, state, and federal law enforcement, including the DOJ itself, according to Mr. Fair. And it was done to prevent racial violence. Democrats on the committee pushed back hard throughout the hearing, arguing that what they were witnessing was a politically motivated prosecution dressed up as oversight. SPLC has pled not guilty in their case, and their legal team has filed a motion to dismiss the indictment in federal court in Alabama, arguing that the charges they constitute a vindictive persecution, retaliation, plain and simple. For 45 years they spent 45 years of work exposing challenging extremism in this country, and they're now facing some blowback for that from the federal government. So now I want to be clear about where independent sector stands. Our president and CEO, Dr. Akilah Watkins, has been direct and consistent in her concern about this case, not just for SPLC, but for what it signals to every organization in the sector. SPLC is a member of independent sector, and beyond that, when the government uses prosecutorial power to go after civil rights organizations, for the content of its mission and the nature of its work, that's not just an SPLC problem, that's all of our problems. So more than 100 organizations did sign a unity pact led by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, committing to stand together when any of them are unjustly targeted in this way. The principle is simple. An attack on one is an attack on all. So we're continuing to watch this case closely, and we'll continue to speak up because the independence of civil society is non-negotiable. So those are the only updates I have. Like I said, everything else in the DC download is stuff we've already discussed at greater length today. So I want to make sure to give people some time back. 2 minutes, even if it's just 2 minutes.
Hey, we'll take 2 minutes, Travis. Thank you so much. And we've shared the link to the DC download in the chat box, and we'll share out some of these resources in our follow-up email to folks. So don't feel like you have to scurry to try to copy and paste some of these links. A couple other things that before we close out here, we wanted to share as well that IS's 15th symposium on public policy for nonprofits is taking place in February of 2027. We have just recently opened up a request for proposals for that symposium, and we encourage researchers, nonprofits, foundations to submit proposals for that symposium. It is an online event. It is usually very well attended. Like I said, it's been happening for 15 years now. We'll drop the link in the chat here as well as share it with you afterwards. But this year's theme is Beyond Survival, Resilience in the Nonprofit Sector. And so we encourage you all to submit proposals for that. Also want to remind folks about IS's upcoming National Summit taking place in Phoenix in October. Registration is now open. I believe we are still in the window for early bird registration prices. So I just want to encourage you all to register for the summit as well. And then lastly, wanted to remind you all that our Voices in Action series is still ongoing, which is our election year initiative where we are providing guidance to nonprofits who are engaging in election year work. Please continue to sign up for that. We'll also share the link out for that and our follow-up resources. And then finally, wanted to give you all a heads up on what our July MPU will be about. We know that IRS audits are a pretty big talk right now. And so our July monthly policy update will be joined by a number of legal experts to talk specifically through IRS audits, how nonprofits can be prepared and what you need to know about that process and the potential for an audit. So please join us in July. We will be releasing registration for that in the coming days. So make sure you sign up for that and share it with your networks. With that, thank you all for joining. I know we are right at 3 o'clock. I appreciate you all joining us for this June MPU, and we will see you all in July. Thank you.